I totally hear it. They're like, oh yeah, you're your own boss. Like you can't come out to lunch. It's like, no, I have to reach out to literally every single person I can find. And if
Hmm.
I run out of the reach outs, then I'm going to add more people to a sheet that I can reach out to next week. And it's
Yeah.
that until it works, essentially.
Hi, Jonathan. So glad to have you on the podcast. We met a while ago and kind of been connected on and off through the past couple of years. I'm so excited to reconnect with you. I'd love to hear about what you're working on and what's new.
Yeah, Brian, it's a pleasure to be here and to reconnect and come back into the circle. Um, since COVID, I've been working on a project called The Journal That Talks Back. We offer affordable and accessible coaching for young professionals. Right now, we're mostly working with companies that bring us in to work with their young professional population to help manage things like anxiety and depression and imposter syndrome and relationships and career. Basically, we have intake calls with each coming client. We match them with their very own coach who is on our team, trained in house, and then you get unlimited journaling. It's kind of like the coaching version of text therapy. So we're working on that. I've been around now for, I think, a year and 4 months. So just past our anniversary to our second year, and we're feeling great.
Awesome. Congratulations. I
Thank
think
you.
this is such a exciting space to be because as anyone coming into the workplace, so I graduated and started working in the heights of the financial crisis in 2008, and
Hmm.
it was a struggle for a very long time to figure out how to progress in my career. I was very fortunate, very blessed to have great mentors and great friends around me. um, I can only imagine how much more difficult it is right now for young professionals to go into the workplace, try to progress in the career in this very different, work environment, social economic environment. Uh, but I kind of want to understand, like, what attracted you to this business? Kind of what sparked this idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my past life, I used to work as a child and youth worker. I did behavior intervention for mostly adults with a primary diagnosis of autism. I also was a distress and crisis counselor as well. That was a lot of S's. And I did that for about 9 years. Worked many, many, many hours, a lot of 80-hour weeks, worked in schools, had my own business, did group home environments, the crisis line that we have here on the Toronto subway, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I got an offer to work at a startup program, and not because of the kids, but because of the organization I was working with. We just did not see eye to eye. And when you're
Right.
working with kids, especially in vulnerable populations, it gets hefty, and you need to see eye to eye with the people you're working with. And I just burnt out. So I joined forces with my stepmom, who runs an executive coaching company in more of a marketing capacity. But we always knew we wanted to sort of blend my background of, using technology to create, communication for people who may not otherwise have access to that kind of communication, especially around, in this case, mental health. And when COVID hit, we knew that it was sort of time to make that happen. So rather than charge, $200 a session for coaching, what if we could charge $200 a month for unlimited coaching? And
Hmm.
we, went undercover, went to a lot of other companies to see what they were doing. Because if there's something that exists that already does everything really, really well, great. What do we need to? We don't have to go through what is sometimes the terrible time of being an entrepreneur. But after a lot of research and a lot of study, we found that while there are some tools out there, there's not a million tools. And we know one size doesn't fit all. We need thousands and thousands of the journals that talk back. That way, everyone who needs some support can access that support in the way. So we're helping to, at least bring some awareness to that and hopefully do some good coaching work as well.
Love what you guys are doing, and I think it's especially needed. Um,
Hmm.
for example, like I see a lot of therapy via text or conversations, moving towards this model because I understand that it's important to have different options for different people. And you hit the nail right on the head. That's, you know, one size does not fit all. Uh, what I like to kind of unpack from that
Yeah.
conversation, what you just described, is a few words kind of perked my ears because as an entrepreneur, and I'm pretty sure, through your journey as well, um, there's so many things that we experience, the highs and the lows. And one of the lows that I hear time and time again is things like um, burnout, right? You mentioned burnout.
Yes.
Um, a lot of friends I talked to, a very successful friend of mine who also is named Brian. Shout outs to Brian. Um,
My
they call
brother
him
too.
Brian number. I defer to him as Brian number one, and he defers to me as Brian number one. We have this very weird relationship where we both think the other is so much more amazing, and I truly admire and love the guy. He he's spoken at lengths about social anxiety, and
Yep.
as you can imagine, he's being very successful. He's doing very well for himself in terms of raising funds, raising capital,
Good.
talking to a lot of people, pitching, and overcoming that social anxiety. And for me, I also um, have a lot of friends, myself included, to that experience imposter syndrome. Let's talk a bit about these things that we as entrepreneurs in general might come across, and maybe how you tackle that towards your target audience.
Yeah. So I think it's a really, really interesting topic because also now scrolling through TikTok, everybody is like 15 years old and diagnosing everybody with something else, right? And I'm not coming at this from a clinician's perspective. I'm a youth worker, I'm a counselor, I'm a coach. So take what I say, coming from that context, not a medical context. But when we look at things like a social anxiety disorder or imposter syndrome or depression, everybody in some capacity, 100% of the world, experiences some of those things in some shape or form. It's very natural. But for people who have something closer to a disorder, it's at a point where that symptom or cluster of symptoms is actually affecting your life, your relationships, your
Hmm.
health and well being in a negative way. And that could look like a lot of things. It could look like discord in a romantic relationship. It could look like not being able to go outside. It could look like not being able to achieve the things that you want to achieve in your career because, you're not good enough for that. I say that with air quotes for those of you listening at home. And those things, when they get to that level, become problematic. And
Hmm.
what's interesting about them is, especially for us as adults, we don't just say like, oh yeah, man, I feel really anxious, like maybe I need to go outside and take a break and come back at this in a healthier way. No, we just beat ourselves up until like we either get it done or burn out and like need to go to bed early. Many of us like engage in, especially I feel like especially true for entrepreneurs, start engaging in like maybe some substance use or things like that and self-medication to sort of, like make it through. And that's where we sort of see, the problematic behaviors coming, which actually really get in the way of a lot of, the important things in our life. In terms of why the journaling thing and why the mood tracking thing, why all of this airy fairy BS, right? The reason is when you have these thoughts and feelings as adults, we often place all of these other weird behaviors around it and avoid actually talking about the core problem. And what journaling does is it allows us to explore what the core issue is through an understanding of patterns. What we have is right now a world where the for so many young professionals, but really everybody, your home life affects your work life is affecting your home life, and often it's not because those things, those instances are so different. It's you have the same thinking and the same behaviors that are getting in your way everywhere.
Hmm.
And through journaling and through a coach looking at it, or through going to therapy and having a therapist talk to you about those things, or through counseling, whatever the case might be, that professional is looking at the data, looking at what they're collecting through that conversation with you, regardless of the medium, and saying, yo, I am seeing this pattern and it is hurting you, my friend.
Hmm.
And it doesn't need to. Let's talk about the tools we can build to sort of help you to live a life of greater ease, peace, and joy. And that's the piece. So sure, there are some things that are not necessarily so cognitive and intellectualized, but things like depression, anxiety are well dealt with in a cognitive way in a lot of instances and through tools that are talking. Uh, if you're going through therapy, like a cognitive behavioral therapy kind of tool or system, journaling in our case is a really effective way at sort of tackling those clusters of behaviors. That was a really big answer to the small question, but there was a lot to say.
No, I love it. I love how you provide so much detail. And what I'm hearing from this description is that just like me, I don't really care how people use which tool people use to get their ads up. There
Yep.
are like so many other tools that are identical, and like I mentioned, even Google has their own version of, like I mentioned to you, even Google has their own version of automated ads.
Yep.
But I want to focus on helping people solve that problem. And what I'm hearing from you is, um, you genuinely care, and you don't care about solving the solution, solving the problem. um, Again, I use the word problem not because
Yeah. No.
it's a problem, but you know what I mean in the whole like startup
It's a
world.
big problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um Regardless of medium, I really love how you said that. It doesn't matter what medium you use, as long as you get the help or another professional to kind of look at the situation and provide that opinion to you. I love hearing that because there's so many people that are out there that want to just push their product or their
Yeah.
service to people. Uh, but what I'm getting from you is that you genuinely care and you want to solve this. I love it. Love to hear it.
Thanks, man. I think like and that's part of the reason why we do intake calls for all of our clients coming in. It's not so I'm the worst sales guy of all. It doesn't work. I'm not good at it. Like just straight up. But when people come onto the phone with me and they're talking about like, what they really look for out of, that mental health support, sometimes they're like, "Oh yeah, like I really hate writing things down." I'm like, "Yeah, you need to talk to another person. Like let me help you match that up. This is not going to be a good fit for you
Hmm.
at this time. Like, let's go figure out something together that will be a better fit." And given my experience as a youth worker, we're putting that like I know my way around. But also something we're doing is I love doing web design, and I'm an avid user of Webflow, like the no
Hmm.
code design system. And this company called FinSuite has a lot of like extra add-ons, and they have this filtering system. And I thought, how can I use that? I thought, what if there was a mental health directory that you could use kind of like a car dealership? Like, okay, I'm buying a used car. I want it to be
Hmm.
maybe one of these different three colors. It has to be less than 100,000 kilometers on it. It must have a sunroof. So we're starting to put together a directory. We have already almost 600 resources on it in North America that are therapy, counseling, coaching, harm reduction, self help, that you can sort of go through and find the right tool for you. I agree with you. So many different, even therapists and counselors and coaches really push their own business because they want to have more clients so
Hmm.
they can help more people. And that's important. But really, there's a bigger, more holistic system that even in Ontario, like the land of free healthcare, like we do this so poorly and we all need to be a lot better at it. So I'm excited that like even when I go pitching for to raise capital for my business and stuff like that, they're like, "Oh yeah, like we're talking to more people like this. Like, does that scare you?" And I'm like, "No, like we need a million Jonathans like
Hmm.
pounding down the streets and like making this a big thing." So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I remember seeing a sort of meme tweet type of thing where um, investors and VC and people in startups will literally start invest or start a startup focusing on mental health but they personally would not kind of approach this topic for themselves. So,
Yep.
what would you say is like the biggest hurdle to kind of, for people to use services like yours, or just seek help in a general way?
I think there's a few issues. I think there's a stigma attached to it still, even in 2023. Like I feel like I'm not sure how old you are, but like I'm 29. I'm from 1993. I'm a millennial,
Mm-hmm.
but I grew up still in like a religious Jewish home. My mom's
Mm-hmm.
side is like first generation immigrant from Morocco and South America. Not that it's the same in all cases, but for me, in my personal experience, I'm a man. Like mental health and feelings is not something that I should, even when I became a youth worker and I'm like, this is something I want to work in.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that's not a man's work. Like, hold your feelings inside. When I was going to be diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, before I was going to doctor after doctor after doctor because we thought I had like a real thyroid problem because like of all the anxiety symptoms I was feeling. But then we didn't know it was anxiety. I was just getting really hot and tunnel vision. And all the
Mm-hmm.
doctors were like, it's impossible that you have anxiety. You're so well adjusted, Jonathan. And
Right.
then I finally went to an endocrinologist and he's like, no, man, like you have an anxiety disorder. Like you only have those symptoms when things happen and you need to go to therapy. And it took that wake up call. I'm like, wow, like if that's my experience as somebody who's in youth work school going through this, imagine what it's like for other people. So there's a stigma attached to it for sure. Culturally, I think there's a stigma, especially for men,
Mm-hmm.
that like you're not allowed to talk about your feelings. You have to be strong. You must provide, like that kind of vibe. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's almost the opposite problem where now that like for people scrolling on TikTok, there's so much information where you don't know what you have and people are like, "Oh yeah, I have anxiety and ADHD and this and this and this."
Yeah.
But it's really important to go to like an actual therapist and talk to them about like your concerns around like your energy levels. Do you have ADHD or is it something else? Because sometimes anxiety can look like ADHD, but the treatment is very different and the way you
Mm-hmm.
want to build structures and tools around that is really different. So I think those are sort of three problems with people like under the age of like 40. But I think for boomers and baby boomers, I shouldn't call them boomers. That's wrong. And Gen X, like the older generations, even recently, like I have family members that I'm talking to and saying like, yeah, you should go talk to somebody, and they're like, no, like I'm perfectly fine. I'm like, but
Mm-hmm.
are you happy? Like, do you feel good every when you wake up? Are you like, yeah, today's another day. I feel really good. No, they struggle to get out of bed. They're grumpy. They're irritable. They lash out at people. Maybe you're just a grumpy person, or maybe there's something going on with your mood, and maybe there's a struggle there. Maybe you're really anxious and you're sort of hiding all of that underneath, all of these layers of strength and big
Mm-hmm.
manly power, right? So I think those are sort of the four key issues as I see it. But I hope it'll get better. I think it will. I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I believe so. I think especially, so I come through the lens of like the Chinese immigrants community,
Yep.
and there's obviously huge stigma around it. It's kind of a known fact, and there have been targeted campaigns around mental health in the Chinese community. I think back in the 90s when I was growing up. What I sort of understanding all of these like hurdles and sort of challenges you're facing, um, I still see how like how things have changed in the past 10 years.
Yep.
More recently, the past 3 to 5 years, especially during the pandemic, it gives me so much hope that more light is being shown on this as and normalizing it, to be able to, okay, it's fine if you have mental health issues. It's fine because you can seek help for it, because you can create a support network for yourself. And if you can't yourself, there are people who is more than happy and willing to help you kind of build that foundation and scaffolding around you
Hmm.
to make sure you're well supported. And I love seeing this. I have suffered from depression before. I've suffered from suicidal thoughts. There's mental health, history in my family and my wife's family as well. But it just gives me so much hope that it's so much less stigmatized the past few years versus like when I was a kid. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
and so, given these hurdles, right? You're in this phase of your business where you've been around for a couple of years. Uh, you're growing the company. You're talking to investors. What is the game plan for you in terms of like growing your business, and maybe also touch upon any ups and downs throughout this journey?
Yeah, and I really appreciate you sharing your own personal experience. It's hefty,
Hmm.
um, but important to talk about because I think if we talk about it too, more people are going to talk about it,
Hmm.
which is important. For me and my business, it's basically bootstrapping until we no longer have to bootstrap anymore. Where I reach out to I think 300 people a week on LinkedIn. Sorry, 200 people a week on LinkedIn. Um, I'm on TikTok like almost like literally every morning, and then I go live, and then I'm on Instagram, and I'm literally everywhere I can be. I have the podcast Am I the Bleep, where we go through Am I the Asshole posts and sort of see how we can coach those people. And we're just finding more and more ways to like talk about mental health, and even in a funny way, like with Am I the Asshole, and sort
Hmm.
of like these interesting, fun, quirky situations. Funding right now has been hard. We're in an accelerator, new chip, so we're guns blazing. I think part of the struggle I had is I'm a socially anxious guy. I'm behind the scenes all the time, and I much prefer it that way.
Hmm.
But as a founder and a guy who is very passionate about this stuff, I have to figure out a way that I can be the guy coming out and talking about it. And at first, I remember recording my first video and just every 5 seconds, like edit. And then I like had my Final Cut Pro open and I was piecing it all together like a wizard. And
That's good. That's actually going to be me this weekend.
you got this. But eventually, it's just like, no, you just get good at trying to put stuff out there. My pitch for investors, literally every morning I would wake up and I would just record myself doing the pitch. Not because partially the recording to watch it back and give myself feedback, am I energetic? Am I because I'm pretty flat affect overall, like on a day-to-day basis. Like
Hmm.
I don't have much inflection in my voice. But like for pitching, you have to, you have to be everywhere. You have to do it. So it's part of that, but also to practice having an eye watching me perform.
Hmm.
Um, so that was really helpful. And I am actually speaking at the SHRM Talent and Acquisition Conference in Orlando in April, and I
Oh,
have to speak for an
congratulations.
hour. Thanks so much. But speaking for an hour in front of people just seems so daunting to me. So
Hmm.
every day I'm like, all right, I go through my deck, either like I read it through or I record myself practicing it, just to get more and more comfortable with it. Um, so basically, we're in a never ending process to generate sales and generate revenue so that we can have more coaches and keep doing like impact the most amount of people. And then on the other side, we're applying for a lot of grants
Hmm.
to support people who couldn't otherwise afford coaching. We have the Paid Forward Fund as part of our program where we're raising money from every month of people's coaching subscription to help people who couldn't afford coaching otherwise. We're
Hmm.
starting a merch store to help with that paid forward fund, but also to raise money for local charities every month. Like we're trying to do, like you go to Starbucks and you order a drink and you want to like get your money's worth, so you get something for each box. We're trying to check all the boxes and really make something that can impact the most amount of people in the way that makes sense for them, whether it's, through listening to me talk about who is the asshole or not,
Yeah.
or if it's like a podcast, talking about like the stigma of mental health. I
Hmm.
think it's all like super important. So until we get funding, we're doing that, but I'm actively pitching. That's been a learning curve too, because I feel like right now, what is it? It's March of 2023. Um, VCs are not investing in early age startups. I feel right now,
Yeah.
it's kind of been like they'll show up to the pitch that they want to hear me and they want me in their circle, and they're like, oh yeah, Jonathan, you're a cool dude, I'd love to keep talking to you.
Hmm.
But they're like, no, you are too young, like the company is too young for what we need at this time. So until then, we're just going for it.
Yeah, so what I love about what you just shared is a very raw and real, like almost daily breakdown of what a real entrepreneur may look like. I
Yeah.
come across a lot of people in my friend circle that says, "Oh, it must be nice to be your own boss. Must be nice to own a business." Um, they don't see all they see is just the glamour on this, on the outside. Maybe we, do decently well, we have business, um, a little bit of cash flow here and there, but they don't see the grind that you just described to create a business, and keep it running. I always say,
Yes.
it's so easy to start a business, but it's so difficult to keep it going and grow it. And I personally have seen it time and time again through sort of my dad's entrepreneurial journey, my uncle's story. That's actually what inspired me to start this podcast, to start these businesses, to help
Hmm.
small businesses grow, and of course talking to other small business owners. Um, but yeah, that grind of like waking up and thinking, going through the checklist of like, okay, how do I grow my business? Okay, I got to do X, Y, and Z. I got to, talk to so many people on a daily basis, cold outreach to, just generate sales. Every dollar is a fight, and every dollar you get
Yeah.
into the bank is like, there's so many things that lead up to it. It's not as simple as, oh, let's just run an ad.
No, and I think it's important to talk about that too. Like you scroll through Instagram or you scroll through TikTok, and I don't normally do that, but now that I'm on those platforms, I'm like, oh, what are other people doing?
Hmm.
And people are like, oh yeah, like you want an easy life, just start a business. It takes a very specific like type of grit, and sometimes I wake up and I think, man, I can't wait to just one day have a job where like I'm going to work for the big corporation. They're going to be like, Jonathan, that your job this week is to change the call to action button to this like mint green. And I'm going to be
Yeah.
like, oh, it'll be tough work, but we'll get there. But with entrepreneurship, it's literally for me 7 a.m. till 7 a.m. the next day, just grinding and trying to like carve out time to take care of myself until I do it all over again. And building it is hard and not always fun, not always easy.
Hmm.
But when at the end of the day, when I get to come on shows or I go to talk to my friends and I say, what am I doing? I'm proud. I'm excited
Hmm.
that like I'm trying to do something that's really meaningful to me. So I totally hear it. They're like, oh yeah, you're your own boss. Like you can't come out to lunch. It's like, no, I have to reach out to literally every single person I can find. And if
Hmm.
I run out of the reach outs, then I'm going to add more people to a sheet that I can reach out to next week. And it's
Yeah.
that until it works, essentially. So totally, it's all about the grind.
And what you described about that whole motivation cycle, that was literally me last night. So um, like this moment, literally just because my wife went out, and and then our 1 year old it was sleeping, so all the lights are off in the house, and I'm on my computer trying to figure out why, how to get more conversions for one of my clients, get them more signups and whatnot. Um, and then I was just sitting there at the counter, at our kitchen counter. I was thinking to myself, why am I putting myself through this? All these like anxiety about like, are we gonna have enough cash flow for the next month? Am I making enough money to pay all the expenses in the business and for our family? Um, and then I was like just so defeated. And I was thinking, I just start applying for jobs and just like
Yeah.
have someone tell me what to do and just be happy with like, all the grunt work. Uh, which brings me to an interesting point between sort of like the coaching, mental health, and entrepreneurship. Um, how like how would your service or your product work with motivating people, coaching through like situations like that. I know I'm pretty sure like whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're someone who, works a regular 9 to 5, go through moments like that where motivation's hard to come by. Um, and then on top of that, maybe you have a little bit of like few symptoms of depression or anxiety. How does that help? How does that tool fit in?
Yeah, so I think there's like a few pieces to it. So there's one, and just the baseline support. Like whether it's again, like doesn't matter the medium or even you're going to talk to a friend, you just say like, "Hey man, this is how I feel today."
Hmm.
That's baseline level of support, and our coaches are absolutely here to give you all of that like TLC and sort of just be there to listen. The second piece about it is, when you're saying, "Hey, like the grind literally beats at my soul." Like I have a for me, like literally, I have a business that I feel like at scale will literally change the world. But why
Hmm.
is it hard for like a business to buy us for their young professional population? And it like that question keeps me up at night. It bothers me. And I have my coach on our team, like I our first customer, and my coach is like, well, why does it keep you up at night? Like, what are you afraid of? Like, let's talk about the fear that's under it. So, is the fear for me specifically that like it's a client acquisition issue, or is it for me in my case, which is the truth, is like maybe I'm not good enough to run this business. Maybe we need other people, and maybe that's actually a good business strategy question to have. But for my coach, he's like, no, today we're going to talk about why Jonathan doesn't feel like he's good enough to deal with this.
Mm.
And that's kind of where that deeper piece that we spoke about at the beginning of this episode comes in, where it's not just the behavior. There's this whole like underlying thinking pattern that literally is trying to bring you down to the ground, and having a professional to help you like unravel um, those knots is really, really critical. Talking to a friend is really important. You already have that comfort, you have that trust, and you can get that baseline support. But a professional is really good at knowing where to push, where to ease up, and what to untangle to get you to that next step. So for entrepreneurship, especially in my case, that's kind of the way we go about it. You hear day after day, like, oh, this sucked and this sucked and this sucked, but I'm working like this and it's happening. It's like, well, like, what are you afraid of, Jonathan? And it's like, oh
Hmm.
no, the big question, right? So that's kind of how it would work.
Awesome. And I truly feel that this tool is extremely helpful. Um, and I love to hear that you're working through the, different channels and figuring out how to, figuring out what that flywheel may look like. Um,
Hmm.
Now, let's kind of fast forward a few years in our minds and see like, or maybe a couple weeks, couple months, who knows? Let's fast forward a little bit and think about how do you define success for you right now, and sort of how would you know you've reached that point?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for me, our mission is to impact the most amount of people through coaching. And we've coached probably over 100 people in the past year, which is super cool. Um,
Mhm.
but 100 people is not 1,000 people, and it's not 1,000,000 people. Do I want to put a finite number to like we're gonna hit 5,000 people by like 2024? I mean, that would probably be good for my like people who are trying to invest in me. That'd probably be helpful. But for me, it just when I wake up is like, am I impacting the most amount of people I can today? How can I impact more people? Is that through social media today?
Mhm.
Or is it through having intake calls with clients, and, or is it through customer service and making sure that everyone who's been matched with a coach, who's been there for 5 months, that I'm still reaching out to them and checking in and making sure, like, one, the technology is a good experience for them, but also that they're still happy with their coach and that they're still working through everything that they need to be working through. So for me, that's kind of how I judge the success. But I think in the future, it's a good exercise to imagine what it's like at 500, 1,000 clients, 2,000 clients, because it also helps me to understand what I need to put in place to have it be functional and still warm. Because I think where a lot of companies in mental health or coaching or whatever the case might be struggle is at the beginning, it's really warm, it's really friendly, it's like,
Mhm.
that big hug. But then later on, as you're scaling, it's like, how can we bring more automation in? How can we use
Right.
AI? And not that those are bad things, but they're not perfect for this instance. Like,
Hmm.
it doesn't make sense that AI should be a therapist at this point in 2023, like at all. And I think it's important, like, to know what we need to put in place as we're growing slowly. Um, and yeah, I guess that's like the again, I'm all about the roundabout end, but they're my answers. I'm gonna own them.
No, I
Um,
love it. I feel
yeah,
like we're on a similar wavelength in terms of I don't like I mentioned, I don't really care how many people use my product. I just want to help people grow their businesses. And
yeah,
if they use my product, great, because it's designed with them in mind. But if they go and hire a freelancer, if they hire me directly, like that's okay as well. Even if it's just a Zoom call. I've done maybe 100 of these type of Zoom calls where I literally just give out free advice to people to
yeah. You
grow
did
their
that with
business.
me.
Yeah, exactly. Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Um, and um, like it's not about money for me. It's like it's kind of cathartic because I wasn't able to give this type of advice to my dad, and he's had businesses that grew a little bit, failed, grew a little bit, and fail, and ultimately like that left a little chip on my shoulder. And now that knowing what I know, I wish I could just travel in time and tell that kid, it was like, okay, tell your dad X, Y, and Z, and this is going to help him.
yeah,
Or like sit down with my dad, travel back in time, sit down with my dad, and just like, okay, this is what you got to do. Um, so I, I love that we're both on a mission to help people in different ways. Um, but now, like, instead of traveling forward in time, let's travel back in time. Okay. Um,
build that time machine.
I'd love to. I'd love to. Actually, my go-to answer with what's your favorite superpower? And I'm going to ask you this as well. My superpower that I would choose is time travel, or like just mastery over time and space, because no matter how much money like, I have this obsession with like speed, being able to do things quickly, and time,
Hmm.
controlling time. um, I I have this unhealthy obsession with it. What would your superpower be?
Time is pretty good, and that's a meaningful solution for me. I'm just like, I want super strength. I'm like, it would just be easier, like, we needed to get a new washer dryer at one point, and
Hmm.
it was so hard and it was so painful to deal with that. And I'm like, like, what if I could just be like, oh, here you go. Or flight, that'd be pretty cool. um I'm not sure I have like a deep, the big feelsy answer to that one, but yours was beautiful. I just want to, like, when Marvel makes their next movie, I would want them to come to me by default because I already have it built in. They don't have to pay for CGI or anything like that. They're just like, oh yeah, we'll get Jonathan to be like the Hulk. It just works, right?
Hmm.
And everybody would love emo Hulk. Like, let's be honest, it would be such a vibe, but we're not there yet. We're not there
One
yet.
day, one day.
Yeah,
Like, it's funny enough, like Hulk is one of my favorites Marvel characters.
yeah,
Um, and I was so happy to see an Asian Hulk in Marvel Comics. And I was like, whoa, someone that looks like me can be a Hulk.
representation.
I know, it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And actually, this is another reason why like having this podcast is something I want to put out there. Is just to put different faces, different walks of life, different lessons out there to see, like, maybe we all share the same mistakes, and we can learn from this, or we can help someone avoid those mistakes, because these are all
Mhm.
common mistakes. um, and B, having different types of people, different walks of life, different lessons learned, sharing all of this will definitely help at least one person out there. And I don't
Yeah, for
care like
sure.
how big of a lift it is to create these. Like I mentioned, I'm going to be spending the weekend editing this. um, it's a big lift, but realistically, only like a dozen people watch these on a weekly basis. I'm still making it because I feel even if it's just a dozen, and maybe my mom watches it a few times and boost that view counter up. She
Yeah,
doesn't understand
absolutely.
what I'm saying. Um, God bless her heart. um, but I just want to put this out there and help people. Now, going back to sort of like the question I want to ask, sh- share a piece of advice or a lesson that you've learned that might help, a younger version of yourself, or, maybe someone out there who's just thinking about starting their entrepreneurial journey. What would that lesson learned be, or what would that advice be?
I think there's a time for planning things. Like it's important, like when you start a business plan or like when you're thinking about starting a business, write out the plan and make sure the plan is like feasible, it's viable, like it's immutable. Like if somebody were to chat, like if somebody came up to me and said, the journal that talks back is a stupid idea, I'd be like, you're a stupid idea. And I'd get like really, not that I would ever say that to somebody, but I'd get really fired up and like, let's go, right?
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's immutable. Like I'll do whatever I can to make it work for as long as I humanly can. So there's that piece. It's like that resilience. But on the other hand, and it's kind of an opposite idea, but I think it's all about figuring out that balance is just trying things.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we spend so much time in a planning phase that actually getting started is like brutal. It's like going on a date. Like you spend so long like thinking about like what if I ask them out? Ask them out. You don't
Mm-hmm.
know until you know, and then you know. Like it could be that that person is not at all a good match for you, or it could be that they're the perfect match. Sorry, Netflix, will take that one.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're missing out on it because you're so fixated on all the planning. Like, how am I going to say it to her or to them? How how am I going to dress when I say that? How like where will we be? Like, do I need to
Mm-hmm.
like creating the perfect situation? There's very few times in history that it's been a perfect situation to start a business or to give something a go. But if you see a need and you feel that, not feel, but feel it, like in your heart of hearts, you're like, this is so important.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you just gotta go give it a try. Even like for me, like maybe my first step wasn't to like hire a development company and build out like UX design an app and then have them build it out and like do all of that stuff. It was to actually go and coach people, like get on a phone and like
Mm-hmm.
see if that's something that makes sense for me. And for me, it makes sense. I've been doing this for 13 years already in some way, shape, or form. It just is part of me. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a natural extension to do the next thing. But if you're thinking about like even something like selling print on demand shirts or something like that, try designing something. Send that design to a bunch of your friends. Say like, "Hey, like I'm thinking about doing this and I'm going to sell them at cost to raise money for this thing for just this round." Like, what do you think? Like go through
Mm-hmm.
all of that, just give it a go. So I think that's like the big lesson for young entrepreneurs. If you're like too much on the just give it a go side, come up with a plan that's immutable. Don't come up with like 100 businesses at once. It's too much. But on the
Mm-hmm.
other hand, if you're that person who's just like you sit with your pen and paper every night and you toil away at the business plan and it's been like a year already, just try it
Mm-hmm.
if it's time.
Something I love about what you just shared, and your journey so far is, I love how you're still very connected to your end user, so your clients, your target audience. And I think that's something important, an important lens to view your advice through is, um, it's important to put the plan into action. Absolutely agree. But figuring out whom to target and talk to, that's
Yeah.
also like a key point. And keeping in touch with those type of people and that group of people is important. So, for example, if um, I'm targeting small business owners, but if I talk to corporate users, right? They may steer me down a completely different route, because their needs are completely different. Even though the audience, if you squint, they look very similar. I
Yeah.
love how you are very clear on whom you're trying to help, and you are constantly talking to them, getting feedback, reaching out. And again, there's no harm in like pivoting. I've pivoted multiple times in what SwiftAds is. um, or was. And my initial version of putting SwiftAds, and I think you went through it as well, is a Google Sheet. I sent out Google Forms to get people to fill out what it is, and then I use Google Sheet automations and scripts that I've collected over the years, and try to hobble together that end user experience that's more or less
Yeah,
automated, right? And I did that for a very long time, in connecting with people that have this pain point. So I love that piece of advice you just shared. It is extremely, extremely valuable. So whoever start hearing, listening to this and want to start a business, take this piece of advice. It's a good balance between planning, putting things into action, and knowing um, whom you're talking to. And of course, coaching is super important, in different aspects, right?
for
But
sure.
yeah, Jonathan, where can people find you? What are you promoting? Um, let's give that shout out here.
The plugs.
Yep.
So, if you're interested in learning more about what the heck we do, check us out at thejournalthattalksback.com. You can book a call with me. Again, I'm the worst salesperson of all time. I'm just going to talk to you and see if we're a good fit for you. And if we're not a good fit for you, I'm going to help you find what's a good fit for you. But we'll talk on the phone like 25 minutes, half an hour. It's going to be super chill. If you're interested in that Am I the Bleep podcast, where we read Am I the Asshole posts and sort of dive into it, we're on TikTok at Am I the Bleep, Instagram at Journal That Talks Back, and on all streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all that as Am I the Bleep. You'll see an animated picture of this bearded lumberjack dude, and then this guy who looks a lot more professional than I do. And we just talk about it and, see who's coachable and how we can coach them and how we can help people in these very, very unique situations. So it's a lot of fun. But yeah, Brian, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I really, really appreciate all of the time and the show. It's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching to the very end. I hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation as much as I did recording and editing it. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. The YouTube algorithm likes that, and it will really help this channel and this video a lot. I have more conversations like this coming up, and I hope you stay tuned.